Our schools have become more and more diverse. Many of our schools have a wide variety of students with an ever-increasing amount of diversity in culture and race. We celebrate those differences, but there is an underlying worry about the ever-increasing achievement gap. When those celebrated diverse differences are named and labeled with underachievement, there is a possibility of increasing that gap through stereotype threat. Here at American Preparatory Academy, we celebrate cultural and racial diversity, and we are striving to close the achievement gap and to limit the damage caused by stereotype threat. As administration of schools, we deal with stereotypes all of the time. The government is continually asking for more information about the demographics of our school. Sometimes this creates a threat to our students. Dealing with that threat through reasoned response and proper education of staff and students can help eliminate some of the stereotype threat our students see. What is stereotype threat? Stereotype threat is a situational predicament in which people are or feel themselves to be at risk of conforming to stereotypes about their social group. Basically, people who are told they fit into a specific group, so they end up being at risk of conforming or becoming the perceived stereotype which fits that group. What are some of the stereotypes we see in education? Often we are faced with the question of what is the achievement gap, and how do stereotypes affect the achievement gap? And what can our response be to questions and pressures those stereotypes create with our students? Here are some ideas of what we can do as administration and as a school to get rid of some of the stereotype threat that is happening at our school. First thing we can think of is to de-emphasize threatened social identities. This is something that we generally do as an administration and teaching team. We do not talk about race, gender, or identity in negative terms. We address behaviors outside of these stereotypes. Some stereotypes have been linked to lower levels of achievement. We can overcome that by taking the emphasis away from those identities and by highlighting social identities that are not linked to underperformance. Identity is never just one thing. We can always identify with multiple groups which have stereotypes. What are some things which students value in themselves? What part of things do students love and you know that students are good at? We can encourage those parts, foster those things which students feel good at. We can help by encouraging our individual students' self-affirmation. We can also highlight social identities which are linked to positive outcomes. For example, here at American Preparatory Academy, we have the highest mean growth percentage in English language arts in the entire state of Utah. Our small 575 students grew more in 1 year than the rest of the 650,000 students in the entire state of Utah. Is stereotype threat something which can be ignored? Never. Just like we do not ignore stereotypes, we do not ignore stereotype threats either. We seek for understanding. We must face it with understanding, as we do many things. We know stereotypes are not true. Yes, they come from somewhere, but usually this is a place of ignorance. People do not understand, so they see something from a limited perspective and make a judgment based on that limited exposure.
This is Letta just pointing out to me that there's another story that I had with that. When I was a sophomore in high school, I've always been a little bit larger than the rest of my classmates. I've been a little bit bigger than most of the kids that I went to school with. Well, I was a sophomore, and I used to ride the bus to and from work, or to and from school, which is work now, but back then it was just school. And so I would get on and off the bus, and I didn't really know a lot of the kids that I rode the bus with because most of the other sophomores were driving cars then, and I was still on the bus, which was a little bit of a disappointment. But we had to stand in line to get on the bus, and I remember, well, I don't remember this, but there was a kid in front of me. His name was Nate, and Nate was always on the smaller side of kids, like, Quentin size. And so it would be like maybe like Jesus standing behind Quentin, right? Jesus is a little bit bigger than most of the kids, and standing behind Quentin, there's a size difference that's involved in that. And well, I guess one day while we were getting on the bus, and Nate rode the bus with me, I bumped into him. I ran into him. And I didn't know this. I don't remember this. I don't remember this happening. But it made Nate mad. It made him upset because I guess I had bumped him a couple of times unaware. And he turned around like he wanted to fight because he didn't know who was behind him. And he turned around and he looks up. And then he just decided to turn back around. And we never got into a fight. Well, I didn't have any idea that this had happened until after I had graduated from high school, and I started working in a little mountaineering shop. And guess who was working there with me? Nate was working there with me. And Nate told me that story. And he said, I was so mad at you. I thought you were the biggest jerk. I thought you were just the big meanie that was picking on the little guy in there. And I was ready to go and fight you for all of that stuff. And luckily we didn't, because Nate was actually the best man at my wedding. And I was the best man at his wedding. And Nate is my best friend of all things, right? We are still good friends. He is my one friend from high school. I have one, and it's Nate. And what would have happened had he continued to make that snap judgment? That I was the big bully, that I was the big jerk that was in there. He would have always thought that. He would have never gone past and known actually who I was and had become my best friend later on. That would have been over at that point in time had he continued on with that judgment. So we always have to make sure that we're not jumping to the conclusion on these things, that we're making sure that we're coming to our own decision on these.
What can we do about it as a school? We can emphasize our high standards. Last year in English language arts, we set the bar. We can reach it again and again and again. Another thing we can do is provide role models. In a lot of ways, we are the role model for other schools. Other schools will be chasing us. We're now on top of the growth scale, and others have seen it and will be wondering how we did it and how they can follow our models. We can reduce anxiety surrounding stereotype threat. We'll continue to emphasize our real ability to succeed regardless of our background, regardless of our race, regardless of gender, and all of the stereotypes that have been put on us. We can practice test using platforms we are testing on a regular basis in our classrooms. We can make some realizations about how growth works. Growth happens in spurts. We have to first understand a concept before we can master it. Sometimes that understanding takes a lot of work and results in a plateau of learning where it seems like growth has leveled out and nothing is happening. In reality, much is happening on the plateau. This is where the strength of foundation is built. How many of you have driven a construction site day after day, week after week, month after month, where it seems like nothing is happening, then all of a sudden a building is there and complete? It is the same with learning. It takes some time to build an idea before it can be turned into an essay, then a short story, then a book. We can also celebrate each individual's growth and emphasize their strengths. We celebrate the parts of growth that individuals have.
Stereotype threat is something that our parent stakeholders need to understand and be aware of, so that together, as a school community, we can mitigate any perceived limitations to student achievement. Educational research over many decades has tried to identify reasons for the gap of achievement between various groups of children. The causes for achievement gaps are multiple and complexly interrelated, and they vary from school to school. Factors that have consistently been identified as contributing to this inequity are family income level, the level of education of parents, and race and ethnicity. Regarding income and education levels, what are the differences that researchers have identified in their studies between the children of low-income families versus the children in higher-income families? Keep in mind, this is not true of all families, but is common in many research samples. The level of language use in the home. So children with more affluent parents hear more words and more complex words than children with lower income parents. Even by the age of 3, there can be a vast difference in the number of words in a child's vocabulary. Access to enriching community resources. Parents with more education tend to seek out these experiences for their children to help them develop cognitively and socially. They can often afford more of these enrichment kinds of activities. Parent ability to choose a high-performing school. Parents with more education are more likely to be invested in carefully choosing a school for their children. Parent involvement at school was another difference. Parents with higher incomes and higher levels of education were found to be more likely to volunteer at their children's school and become involved. Home environment that supports learning. This was another finding, that parents with more education are more likely to support and help with their students' schoolwork. They read to their children more often during the week and are more likely to have the skills necessary to help their students as they go through upper grades. Researchers also noted differences in achievement levels when they compared students by their race and ethnicity. This is a prime example of how stereotype threat can impact actual results. Because while there are differences in achievement test scores, there is no significant scientific data showing intelligence differences between children of different ethnicities. For us, rather, diversity is a strength. It broadens the platform of thinking and perspective for all students, allowing insights and understanding that will be valuable throughout their entire lives. Recently, we asked APA West Valley One parents to respond to this thought. At our campus, we have students from many, many different backgrounds. Some people think students at a school like ours won't be as academically successful as students from other areas. Do you agree with this? Here's their responses. At our campus, we have students from many, many different backgrounds. Some people think students at a school like ours won't be as academically successful as students from other areas. Do you agree with this?
No.
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 No. That's not true. No, it's not true.
Stereotype threat can have an effect on students and how they perceive their abilities. In naming the threat, we have started the process of taking away its potency.
Our students are being trained to recognize generalizations in terms which simplify a complex problem, which may or may not relate to them. Stereotypes are some of those generalizations, and in order to overcome the threat they pose, students need to recognize the danger and move mentally into a positive space where they are no longer threatened by negative stereotypes.
We can overcome these obstacles through pointed interventions and reasoned responses to the threat of stereotypes, which have been imposed on our school, our students, or our staff.
We will continue to remind our stakeholders of the incremental aspect of growth and that consistent effort will always produce results. If we are careful about the management of stereotypes and the perception they create, the result will be our students' ability to see themselves as successful.
Please stay tuned for a word from our sponsor.
Enrollment is now open at American Preparatory Academy, where the staff is friendly, where the students are smart, and the administration has just successfully completed their coursework on EDL 678 underneath the esteemed tutelage of Dr. Goner.